Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to tell you another supernatural story, as always with a kind of skeptical twist. This one is particularly kind of special and important to me because it combines two things that are very, very big in my life. Photography, which is easily my biggest passion of all time, and probably my one true love, and Yorkshire, which is where I was born and where I currently live. For those of you who don't know, I was born in South Yorkshire and I spent the last decade or so moving around the country, and now I currently live in West Yorkshire in Leeds. And this story that we're going to be talking about today is set in West Yorkshire in the small village of Cottingley. In 1917, a 9-year-old Frances Griffiths and her 16-year-old cousin Elsie Wright were living together with their mothers and Elsie's father in the West Yorkshire village of Cottingley. They got on well and would often play together down at the bottom of the garden, particularly in a little stream or a beck. One day, after their mothers got kind of mad at them for playing in this little river stream type area and coming back with their clothes and their feet all muddy and wet, the girls responded that it only happened because, well, we wanted to see the fairies. The mothers, of course, laughed it off as a kid's story, but the girls were serious and they decided that there and then they were going to prove to their mothers that, hey, fairies are real, we're not just making this up. So they borrowed Elsie's father, Arthur's camera, and it was, oh my god, it was one of these awesome mid-quarter plate cameras, and it took photos on photographic plates. Beautiful little camera, I'd love to use one myself. And anyway, they borrowed the camera, went back down to the bottom of the garden, and they came back about half an hour or so later, and they asked Arthur to develop the plates for them in his dark room in their house. What he saw was little Frances, 9 years old, sitting down at the bottom of their garden, surrounded by 4 fairies. Arthur took one look at this and he's like, look, it's just the girls being creative, right? They got some cardboard cutouts, or they used dolls or whatever, and they faked this, and he kind of dismissed it as just a cute photo, kids being kids. The mothers were a little more curious, and they thought there might be something to it. So a month or two later, the girls borrowed the camera again, and they took another photo, didn't they? This time it showed 16-year-old Elsie kneeling on the ground, reaching out to this small little gnome or fairy type boy. At this point, when Arthur developed the photo, he thought the girls were just pranking everyone, and he was actually kind of mad about it, and he banned the girls from using his camera anymore, and he was like, nope, none of this, stop it. You're too old for this kind of silliness. But his wife, Polly, actually thought different. She really, really believed in all this supernatural stuff, and she thought the photos were real. What's interesting is, at the time, Elsie even sent a copy of the photo of herself with the fairies to one of her friends, saying how funny it was because she never saw the fairies in her old home, only here in England. Fast forward a year or two to 1919, and Polly, the mother, attends a lecture on spiritualism, and she asks the speaker about the photos, and she's like, could these be real? He passes copies of them along to Edward Gardner, who was a leader of the Theosophical movement, which was a movement founded in 1875 with the aim of, and I quote, forming a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour, encouraging the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, and investigating the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. Gardner in turn got the original plates from Arthur and passed them along to a photographer called Harold Snelling, who, surprisingly, said the photos were, and again I quote, genuine unfaked photographs of single exposure. Open air work, show movement in all the fairy figures, and there is no trace whatsoever of studio work involving card or paper models, dark backgrounds, painted figures, etc. However, Snelling actually only went as far as to say the photos only definitely showed what was in front of the camera. He never actually said, these are definitely real fairies. That said, Edward Gardner was an incredibly excitable man, and he was very excited by this. As a leader of the Theosophical movement, one of his core beliefs was that humanity is undergoing a cycle of evolution towards increasing perfection, and he thought that these fairy photos were important because, at the time, he was quoted as saying, the fact that 2 young girls had not only been able to see fairies, which others had done, but had actually for the first time ever been able to materialise them at a density sufficient for their images to be recorded on a photographic plate, meant that it was possible that the next cycle of evolution was underway. So he not only took these photos to be proof that fairies existed, but that proof that fairies were evolving and changing and growing, and were now able to be seen on camera because their density was changing and all this crazy stuff. All this said, we have to ask, does any of this prove the photos were real? Or were these two men just seeing what they wanted to see because they wanted to believe they were real? They wanted to believe in fairies and the theosophical movement and this idea of magical creatures evolving and so on. They definitely wanted to believe, especially Gardner, and it's clear he had some unconscious biases. And these kinds of unconscious biases affect all of us, and we can't help it because we're human, and it's a part of being human. Of course, we wish we could be objective a lot of the time, but that's not always realistic or possible. There are, of course, ways we can try and be as objective as possible, like in this case, rather than Gardner just taking the original plates to one photographer who maybe shared some of his views, he could have taken it to several photographers from all different backgrounds, some skeptics, some religious, some spiritual, some this, you know, and had different people analyse them and then all come together to reach some kind of consensus. But at this point it seems that Edward Gardner was just so excited about these photos and kind of wanted them to be real so much that one expert opinion saying, well, they're real to the point where they're not fake, was enough for him to say, well, clearly fairies are real and this is proof of them, you know? Thankfully the photos were examined by other experts later, but we'll get to that in a minute. Before all that, the photos were discovered by none other than Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, that Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame, an incredibly intelligent, smart man who was actually quite gullible when it came to this kind of stuff. He was properly, fully taken in by this. At the time, he had been commissioned by a magazine called The Strand to write an article on fairies, and he wanted to use these photographs in his article. So he got in touch with Arthur Wright and tried to determine if they were real, and he offered money to Arthur to use them in his photograph. And at this point, Arthur, who at this point had been like, oh, these stupid girls and their silly prank, he was like, hang on a minute. If Arthur Conan Doyle thinks they're real, maybe there's something to this. So Arthur agreed to let Doyle use them in his article, but he didn't want to accept any money for them because he was like, well, if fairies are real, this needs to be shown to the world. I'm not taking money for that, you know, just get it out there. At this point together, Doyle and Gardner sent the photos off to more experts, this time several of them, including some who worked for Kodak. But the experts at Kodak refused to offer a certificate of authenticity because they said that while the photos showed no signs of being faked, they also could not be taken as conclusive evidence that they were authentic photographs of fairies. And this is where the unconscious bias thing comes in, because what's really funny is that even though several experts at Kodak all agreed to this and said the same thing, Gardner wanted so much to believe that these photos were of real fairies that he actually accused at least one of the Kodak technicians of not examining the photos properly or objectively because one of them had said before he'd seen the photos, after all, as fairies couldn't be true, the photographs must have been faked somehow. And so he thought, well, this guy's clearly biased and he didn't look at them properly. Which is all kind of funny and ironic, isn't it? The photos were also examined by experts over at Ilford. Ilford being a great brand who still makes some of my favourite black and white film today. And the experts there reported that the photos showed, and I quote, some evidence of faking. While another expert called Oliver Lodge suggested that they'd been faked using a troupe of dancers to masquerade as fairies. All that said, despite loads of experts saying, well, we can't say they're real, and other experts saying, well, they're definitely fake, Doyle went ahead and published his article on fairies using these photographs. And in 1920, he actually went back to the girls, Frances and Elsie, and asked them to take more photos for him so he could use them in more articles and get more proof. Now, here's the thing. Surely if these kids were faking, and this famous physician and author and writer and big shot guy comes to you and he's like, I'm involved now, I believe in this, surely at that point the pressure's there where you're gonna confess, right, if you're faking. Or they're gonna come up with an excuse about why they can't do it, or I don't know, God knows what. Surely they'd only be able to get more photos if this was real and genuine, right? And that's the thing, they did get more photos. They went away and they came back with 3 more. First of these final 3 photos showed Frances, who was now around 12 years old, with a small fairy leaping over her shoulder. The next was of a fairy standing on a leaf, offering a flower to Elsie. And the final photo shows a bunch of fairies standing in long grass with this kind of strange structure between them, which experts at the time called a sunbath. Now, when Arthur Conan Doyle published these photos, not everyone believed they were real, but a lot of people did. The majority of people probably did. And Arthur himself believed they were real right up to his death in 1930. There was still plenty of public interest around these for a while, and there was a lot of talk about them, but slowly it started to die down until around the mid-1960s. Then in 1966 we get another development. Elsie gives an interview to the Daily Express in which she claims that the fairies could have been figments of her and her cousin's imagination, but she says that the photos were real. So she tried to claim that, yeah, no, we just made the fairies up between us, but somehow the cameras captured these figments of our imagination because our imaginations were so vivid, they materialized on camera. And that's what she tried to claim for the next 10 years. Then in 1978, the absolute legend that is James Randi got involved, and he started to investigate the photos, and he used new up-to-date computer tech to analyse them and all this stuff, and he started doing research, and what he found was pretty much definitive proof that these had been faked. He looked at the figures in the first photograph and their poses and how they looked and everything, and he noticed that they were in the exact same poses, the exact same sort of size and shape and everything as some dancers drawn in a book called Princess Mary's Gift Book, which had been published in 1914 or 15, something like that, so only a couple of years before the girls took the photos of the fairies. And it was later discovered that the girls had a copy of this book too. So, as you can see from these images, the figures look almost identical, the only real difference being the addition of the wings on the fairies. It wasn't, however, until 1983 when Elsie and Frances were interviewed for another magazine called The Unexplained, and in this interview they admitted finally that they had faked the photographs. They confirmed that they'd copied the illustrations from this book that James Randi identified, and they'd basically copied them onto cardboard, drawn them out and stuff, added wings, and they'd use hat pins to hold them up and attach them to the plants in the garden. However, what's interesting is at this point they changed their story and said, no, we did actually see real fairies down there. We would play with them, they were real, definitely, but we couldn't get them on camera, so we faked the photos. With everything we know today and technology what it is, it's easy for us to look at these now and see that the photographs are clearly fake. In every photo, the lighting on the fairy figures is all wrong for where it would be if they were actual 3D creatures. The edges of the wings look too solid and literally cut out. In the second image, there's weird perspective issues. In the fourth photo, the fairy suddenly has like a change in style, and instead of wearing kind of like floaty, dancey fairy clothes, it's suddenly dressed in the latest Paris fashions for the 20s, you know? There is, however, one question that still remains around these images, and that is that the girls actually only confessed to faking the first 4 images and not the 5th one. A slight mystery still surrounds that. So it was different from the others in that the girls themselves didn't feature in it, and some of the fairies looked a little more transparent than the others, and then there was this odd structure in the middle, right? What's interesting is that both Elsie and Frances claimed that they were the ones who took this photo, and they were so sure. They were like, no, I took it, no, I took it, I took it, no, you know what I mean. What's interesting though is that Elsie claimed that this one was faked like all the others, you know, cardboard figures in the garden, blah blah blah, but Frances was like, no, this one was actually real. This one we did actually photograph the fairies. So there's some discrepancy there. In an interview in the 80s, Frances said, about that photograph, it was a wet Saturday afternoon and we were just mooching around with our cameras and Elsie had nothing prepared. I saw these fairies building up in the grasses and just aimed the camera and took a photograph. So if they're willing to admit to everything else and not this, why would they hold out and claim it's real when they've already been caught out? You know, there's not really much benefit to still trying to claim it, right? So does that mean it was genuine and it was real? Is that possible? I mean, how else do you explain the weird structure, the transparent natures of the fairies? Well, actually there is a simple explanation. Double exposure. 2 photographs exposed on the same photographic plate. That would explain why both girls think they took the photo, because each of them had pressed the shutter once. It would explain the transparency of some of the fairies. It would explain why everything looks a little off and weird and it's a little confusing and it kind of looks like there's this weird structure and so on. A double exposure would explain everything. and it's not really that much of a mystery, and it seems it wasn't really a photo of actual real fairies. So there you go, that is the story of the Cottingley Fairies, and at this point, yes, it's clear that the photos weren't real, or rather they weren't of real fairies, but it's still a very interesting story, and still one that we can learn a lot from and ask a lot of questions about, and that raises some really interesting discussions, you know? Why were so many people, including incredibly intelligent people like Arthur Conan Doyle, so taken in by these photographs, which to us look incredibly fake? And why did so many people want to believe? Is it like, in the Ouija board video we spoke about how they gained a lot of popularity at the end of the World Wars because people kind of wanted to connect with their loved ones and they wanted to believe. And this was around the same time, it was at the end of the First World War, and a lot of people kind of wanted to believe in the supernatural, they wanted some kind of hope, they wanted something to believe in. Is that why they were so ready and willing to believe in something like fairies existing? And the other thing we have to ask is, why did it take so long for these photographs to be debunked? The first image was taken in 1917 and James Randi didn't definitively debunk it until the 70s. You know, that's 60 years of people not really knowing if these photos were real or not. And that's a long time to go, so why did it take so long, and why do so many people believe it for so long? Yeah, I don't know, it's interesting stuff, and I would really recommend you go discuss it down in the comments, let me know what you think, and also let me know if there's any other similar stories like this that you'd like me to talk about in a video or discuss, or if there have been any other similar kind of hoaxes or fake photographs or anything like that, anywhere where you live or grew up or anything like that. I just think this is a fascinating, wonderful little story, and I think, despite the fact that they're not real, they're beautiful little photographs of young girls having a great time and playing a prank that got a bit out of hand, and I think it's a great little story and something we can learn a lot from, and that's why I want to share this with you today. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I kind of hate doing this at the end of my videos, but a lot of my videos have been demonetized lately and things are a little bit difficult, so if you can, or you would like to, I do have a Patreon if you want to go support me over there. The link is on screen and down in the description below right now. I post things like video scripts and video notes, behind the scenes stuff, extra photographs, lots of my like artsy photos that I take and things like that, and there's a whole bunch of stuff over there if you want to go check it out and support me, but absolutely no pressure, I just thought it was worth mentioning. Also, if you're new here, it would be wonderful if you subscribe, because I do lots of different book reviews and poetry reviews and sciencey videos and skeptic-y, atheist-y type videos and commentary stuff, and talk about lots of social issues, and I try and make videos for everyone, you know, good stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling. Like I say, if you're new here, please subscribe, and thank you for watching today. I appreciate you a lot, and I will see you all again very, very soon.